Welcome to episode 14 of the Icario podcast. Today, I want to start, before we get into the main content of the show, I want to briefly talk about something and share something that is current, which is right now, if you look around, it can look and feel like the world around you is descending into chaos. The most prominent example, as I'm recording this anyway, the most prominent example was the riots at the Capitol in the States. And basically a failed coup or something. And that's kind of the top of mind thing that's going on. But let's be honest, that's not the only thing. That's not the only worrying thing that's been happening. Well, most of us have been sitting in lockdown. There's a pandemic going on, which is not great for just how you feel as a person, for your mental health, right? And while that's going on, we have all these kind of political tensions. We have basically a higher level of anger at each other and mistrust and so on than ever before. Plus, we have an ongoing ecological disaster that is basically greater than a human mind can fathom. And lots of other stuff, right? There's all this stuff that's going on. And I want to bring this up because it can feel very disheartening to have the sense that it's like, I have no choice but to go down with the ship, right? It's like everything's descending into chaos, but it's all stuff that's basically outside my control. Like I can't do anything about this. And that can lead to despair. And what I want to talk about here is there is one way in which what we do at Icario relates with this. And look, I can't say that I have the solution, if only, right? But I have an idea here that I want to share and start a discussion about. Because, well, the first thing is like, don't give in to the despair and into the helplessness, which is easier said than done. But I think it's important to kind of stop and remind ourselves that it really doesn't serve anyone. And in practical terms, one of the most practical things you can do about this is go on an information diet. It's like if you're sitting there and, watching news developments like a hawk, the minute-to-minute developments of whatever the disaster is that's going down in your corner of the world. And you maybe have a Twitter feed or some other social feed where people are angry at each other in real time and stuff. It's not helpful. Right? At some point, you're not helping anyone else by being this informed and this worried and this anxious about the state of the world. You're also not helping yourself. Because whatever it is that you want to do, whatever roles you have in life, whatever you have to get done today or this week, you're not going to do it better if you're like an anxious wreck. We have to kind of counter the FOMO because it can feel like, but look at all this important stuff happening. I have to be informed. But no, you don't. It's like you certainly don't have to be minute by minute informed. You can go on an information diet and you can basically, one update a day, one update a week even, will keep you informed enough, to keep functioning in the world. And it will do wonders for your mental health. And it's one of the things you can do to kind of regain some of your strength. And speaking of regaining strength, I think that now and times like these, and especially when it seems desperate, this is a good time to turn inward and to think about, okay, what can I do? And what can I do about myself? So even the idea of the information diet, it's a lot about, you can think of it as a stoic approach, is to say, look, there's lots of stuff that I can't control. I'm not going to worry about stuff that I can't control. Instead, I'm going to use my time and energy worrying about stuff I can't control. And okay, my pronunciation there was probably not great. I'm not going to worry about stuff that I can't control. I'm going to worry about and invest in things I can control. That's what I meant to say. And what that means is develop yourself, develop your skills, develop your strength, develop your mind. The reason this is what we talk about at Icario is because to me, that is step one in empowering yourself. And what empowering yourself is about is to get yourself in a position where you are not a victim as easily, okay? To get yourself in a position where even if a lot of crazy shit is going on in the world around you, you're still in a position to make decisions about how you spend your time and energy and what you focus on. And you have the abilities, the skills, the resources to reach out and do something about, to reach out and do something, if that's what you want to do. And you have the skills and ability and resources and so on to keep yourself and those close to you safe and sane. When you feel like this, when you feel like everything's descending into chaos and you feel the despair coming on, that's my reminder, is it's a good time to turn inward and develop your own strengths, essentially increase your own power level so that you're not as much a victim of external circumstances. But this is not about kind of retreating into your cave and letting the world burn down. The idea here is that strong people forming strong, small communities with a strong community culture. If we have a lot of that, that is very anti-fragile. Okay, so if you think about a nation that is full of people who are all kind of struggling away by themselves, right? If the average person in a nation is struggling away in isolation, then that person is a victim, right? That person is dependent on, they need to be saved, essentially. They need maybe the government to come in and do something competently. Otherwise, they're in trouble. That's not a great position to be in. And plus, if everyone's by themselves, if everyone's alone, you end up having a nation of victims. Whereas if you have strong individuals, and I mean strong, overall, like a strong mind, a strong mindset, strong skills, basically people who can take care of themselves. If you have lots of those people, then they're not as easily victimized. But also if those people form communities, and that can be, neighborhood communities, friendship communities, whatever communities, people come together and cultivate strength in those communities. And more specifically and importantly, the kind of strength that doesn't depend on vilifying another. Okay, strength in a community that doesn't depend on vilifying your neighbor. Unfortunately, that is harder to find than the simple us versus them kind of community forming, right? But if that were the case, if you had a nation full of strong individuals that form strong bonds in deliberate communities with deliberately strong community culture, then that entire nation becomes anti-fragile. That entire nation is much less dependent on external circumstances and is much less likely to be shaken by external circumstances. That is the basic idea of what we're trying to do with Icario. This is why Icario is primarily about personal development and about building strong community. Because I believe that this is a potential solution to some of the problems we're seeing and to some of the problems that we have been seeing mounting in the last decade or two. I think that we can create something of an inside-out ripple effect. And that's kind of the best case scenario, right? The best case scenario is that we have more people who empower themselves and empower communities around them and so on, and it all somehow works out. But of course, is this going to happen? No idea. How likely is this? It's not very likely. But here's the other side of this. Even if it's true that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, you're still going to be better off if you've developed your own skills and you've empowered yourself, right? You've empowered yourself and you've built a small community of empowered people around you. Even if these are the end times, you'll still be better off if you do that. So the goal with a lot of what we do with Icario is to provide tools and ideas and practices to help make more resilient people and more resilient communities. That's kind of the big picture goal of what we're doing. And all of our content essentially steers towards that, and also what we are doing with Icario, with this small team of people. And what I have been doing in my life so far is essentially a case study of that. Now, like I said, this is an idea. This is something that has been forming for me for a long time. And this is something that I would love to have a discussion about. So if you have thoughts about this to share, if you have questions about this, let's start a discussion. And you can do that. One of the things you can do is you can go to the show notes, which are at icario.com/014 for episode 14. And you can leave a comment there. Or you can go to anchor.fm/Icario to leave us a message. There's a button there you can click that says message, and you can just leave an audio message on your phone or your computer. And we might feature your question or your message in a future episode. So that's my brief intro and my idea about the troubled times that we live in and potentially the desperation that you've been feeling about that. And I hope you find this interesting or inspiring or worth discussing. And with that said, let's get into the meat of the episode.
Welcome to the Icario podcast, once again, where we help you optimize your life, break free from the human zoo, and become a force to be reckoned with. Once again with your hosts, Ollie. Once again, hello.
And I'm Shane. Hello.
I think I said once again like 3 or 4 times in that intro. Yeah, I was winging it. Could you tell? Like usual. What we're talking about today,
the
Shane?
only podcast that has a different tagline every week, apparently.
Yeah, we kind of make it up on the spot.
So today we're talking about a very interesting concept that is, if you can spot it, you've got it. Or, as I came across it, but I tried to find a source of this, I couldn't. The way I learned about this was someone told me, or I read somewhere, that most of perception is projection. So both of those things are the same idea. And we want to talk about what this means, but also how to use this as a personal growth tool. So, first of all, you're currently writing an article on this topic or related to this topic. So can you give us a bit of an intro? What is this idea of perception is projection, or if you can spot it, you've got it?
So this is something that this is a concept that was first introduced to me shortly before I started training as a counselor / psychotherapist. The idea that if you can spot it, you've got it. And it's one of these things that apparently it's like one of these common phrases you hear amongst therapists and counselors. It's the idea that things that irritate you about other people or about, certain situations or whatever is in some way a reflection of what's going on within you. And that's really vague because there's a lot about that to unpack. But I can only use I think this kind of thing is best described with a story, like a personal example.
Sure.
So I have an anecdote about this, really. It's only the past 6 months that I've really applied this in a practical way and seen results from it. Because this is also something that's really hard for a person to acknowledge. The things that piss you off, the things that irritate you about other people. Like, who wants to really look within themselves and find evidence for the thing that they hate or despise or irritates them about other people? Who wants to find that in themselves? Where's the motivation for that? It's just easier to just be like, that guy's a dick. And that's the end of the story. Yeah. Convenient. It's easy. But I've always been, when it comes to psychology, when it comes to self-awareness and stuff, I've not always been content with just that kind of approach. So I think it was about 3-4 months ago now, I decided to start losing a bit of weight. I mean, I wasn't particularly heavy anyway, but I thought, you know what? Let's just see if I can get really lean. Let's see how that works. Let's see if I can do that just as a personal development goal. Because in my mind, it's like this is as good of a goal as any. And one thing I noticed was within a few weeks, I had started to notice overweight or out of shape people a lot more. Yeah. So I was walking around just in the street and I'd see people who were carrying a bit of extra weight, and I could tell that I was registering it a lot more than I previously was. And I noticed this initially, and then over time this started to become feelings of aversion. I was like, and it's just this strange nagging feeling of yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it started to develop into more sort of disgust feeling. It's like, ugh. It's like, why? Because it came in through the back door. These things, it can be hard to notice when they arise.
Yes, because you went, presumably the same amount of overweight people are walking around, right? And you went from basically not noticing them at all to noticing them and feeling irritated by it somehow.
Yeah. That's precisely what happened. It's not that there were more overweight people.
Yeah.
It's that because of some shift within me, I started to notice this more. and the aversion that came up, this like creeping ugh. So because one of the things I want to do in my life, one of the values I want to embody is compassion and truth, and to be more on the love end of the spectrum than the fear one. I thought to investigate this further and think, hang on, let's find out why this is happening. Because the fact is, I don't like having these feelings towards, like, especially groups of people. I know that like certain individuals they'll trigger certain things, but this became a broad brush judgment of just overweight people. So I started to ask myself what actually happened there. So I wrote a lot about this, and I think the conclusion I came to, which actually resolved a lot of it, was that without recognizing it, without acknowledging what had happened with me, was in order to, like, when I set the goal of becoming super lean, it seemed that at the same time there was a fear in me that crept up of being overweight, or maybe there was always that fear, because I used to be an overweight kid. I was overweight, I was tubby, I had a belly, and I experienced quite a lot of shame around that. So it seemed that the desire, it's like there was a shadow fear on the back of the desire. It's like two things at once. Like, I'm going to be lean, but also I'm terrified of being overweight. And that fear kind of manifested itself in my experience as, overweight people, I don't want anything to do with that. It's like, rather than it be like, acknowledging that I'm afraid of being overweight, because that's a painful thing to acknowledge, it's like a fear. It seemed that just, that was the thing that sort of drove this.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, if that kind of covers it.
So you figured that, yeah, like you say, there's like this inner shadow side of you, and it's the thing you're seeing in other people, and the emotional response you get is actually just a reflection of something that's going on inside you.
Yes.
And you're saying that the realization of this led to this resolving itself, or what happened with this then?
So one of the principles I have, which I've kind of tested and experimented with, is that awareness is, I often say to myself, awareness is everything. Because it seems that when we want to change something, oftentimes we'll need to exact effort in a certain way, in some situations and some circumstances, to reach some kinds of goals. But in my life, I've noticed time and time again that through becoming non-judgmentally aware of something, that seems to set in motion a series of changes all by itself.
Yeah.
And this was no different. So I became aware of this tendency within me. I became aware that I'm actually just kind of afraid of being like overweight. But actually it was more than that. I was afraid of being undesirable.
Yeah.
I was afraid of, and then you can keep extending this, afraid of being overweight, undesirable, unlovable, unworthy, not enough. It kind of always stems from this not enough thing. And from just recognizing that, and also at the same time recognizing that there were certain habits of mine and certain tendencies and behaviors that I just didn't like about myself, such as my tendency to overeat like greasy food and stuff, and I didn't like that about myself. Just becoming aware of it all, but without judging it necessarily, that it's as if that allowed me the space to see things from a less emotional, more objective place.
Yeah.
So rather than seeing an overweight person and be like, ugh, it's like I saw that, and I still got triggered when I realized it, but I just began to acknowledge that, oh, okay, I can, yeah, totally, I could be like that.
Yeah.
I can be like that, you know? So rather than it being judgment, it was more like I felt a kind of kinship, a kind of connection. Say someone's overweight, it's like, I get it, dude. Someone's overeating food and stuff. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm no different to you. I'm doing my best as well, but I totally understand how that can happen.
Yeah, yeah. There, but for the grace of God, go I.
Okay.
I don't know where that's from, unfortunately, but that's the to me that's the expression of like you see the beggar in the street and you're like, but for the grace of God, that would be me. Like, in other words, it's basically luck that separates me from this person, right? You have that compassion, where instead of saying, oh, you're different and I don't like it, you go, I get it. Like, in a way, I'm just lucky that, my life played out a little different.
Yeah. That's the attitude I tend to take, because I do have that part of me that's still judgmental and fearful and likes to see itself as in some ways different or in many ways better than certain types of people. And if I could choose to not have those judgments and stuff, I totally would choose to not have them. But the fact is, I'm a human and I do have them.
So this is, let's go into some more examples of this, because this was a specific example of something triggering an emotion in you that seems to have something to do with another person, but that actually turns out to have something to do with you. And I think that this is, well, like you mentioned earlier, it's kind of unpleasant to acknowledge this. This is not a comfortable insight to have. But I do think it's widely applicable. And there's actually a parallel example to this that I think is related, because I think your emotional response to external things, in general, your emotional response to external things reveals some underlying truth about what's going on inside you. And a simple example that's maybe less uncomfortable to think about is think about insults. Like, imagine someone insulting you, and you can clearly imagine someone saying something in anger to you that doesn't trigger you at all, because you just don't, So for example, you said like, you used to be overweight, like you have this underlying fear. So if someone kind of in anger or as an insult insinuated that you're fat and undesirable because of that, maybe that would sting, right? But the thing is, if you had no personal issues with this, and someone said, oh, you're fat and ugly, you'd just be like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, there's some insults that would just completely be like water off a duck's back.
Exactly, yeah. So an insult, it only hurts you if it touches something inside you that you're actually insecure about.
Of course.
And so then the interesting thing is, you would then have a negative emotional response because someone said something mean to you, and the immediate association you make is, well, this person said something mean to me, that's why I feel bad. But the truth is, if they had said something slightly different but just as mean to you, that just doesn't hit a nerve, it doesn't hit an insecurity that you have, you'd just be fine. There'd be no emotional response to that. And so that is an example that shows that what seems to be an external cause is actually closely tied to something internal.
Yes.
And so in the same way, so an insult is like a direct, like deliberate attack. But then, you can be walking around and encountering something that irritates you. In a much more passive way, people can irritate you. And it's the same principle. If it irritates you, there is something going on inside you that is triggered by this. There's something going on. There's some insecurity. And in many cases, and this I think is the idea of perception being projection, in many cases, it's the thing that you find irritating about someone else is something you do yourself and you dislike in yourself.
Yes.
And so kind of the colloquial wisdom here, or the street smart version of one of these, is avoid people who say, "Oh, I can't stand all this drama all the time." I avoid other people. I try to stay away from people who have so much drama. Avoid those people, because guess what? They're the source of the drama. The person who's going around going, "Oh, I hate other people. I hate drama queens. I hate people who always make drama about everything." You're the one making the drama, and that's a reflection of that, right? You think it's other people, but actually it's you.
Yeah.
So these are some examples, right? And I also have personal examples of this. I think it's very interesting to start paying attention to this. And this is something I started doing years ago, where whenever something bothers me, whenever something triggers me, I ask myself, what is it in me what am I seeing here that's actually me, essentially?
I do the same. It's difficult to do that, though, isn't it, initially?
Yeah.
Because especially as soon as you're emotionally triggered by something, it's hard to ask that question.
Yeah, it's usually after the fact.
yeah, immediately after. As soon as someone insults you, you're a dick. Oh, what is it about this in me that bothers me?
Yeah. I haven't gotten to that level yet, yeah.
But there is something I just wanted to say before we continued, is so this is something that came up as I was editing literally like 20 minutes ago, the content piece I'm making about this. So in the content piece, I'll circle back to this episode and link to it because it would have been published by the time this podcast comes out, but it'll be in the show notes anyway. But in the content piece, I talk about how I essentially resolved some inner conflict I had with Ryan and Jonas as I was living with them, and we can talk about that a little bit more later if you like. But I just talk about literally how I did this, and it's precisely what you just said. I acknowledged, I made a big list of all the things that seemingly Ryan and Jonas did that were pissing me off. And then I looked at the list and I found evidence for when I was doing all these things, or when I had done these things, or when I'm found that source of me that's capable of all of this stuff. And a shocking number of things on that list were directly applicable to things that I did. And I asked myself, do I like that about myself? What relationship do I have to those parts of myself? And then I was like, man, I don't like most of that. And then the third step was to work on accepting those things in myself. And that's the process I went through. However, there is a sort of caveat too, which did come up in, like when I was training as a psychotherapist, was sometimes the projection is not necessarily related to something you do and something you don't like about yourself. Projections can also exist in the form of some unresolved issue you have with someone else in your life who this person reminds you of. So there's some caveats to this. And that's one thing that I wanted to keep my content piece quite short, but I could have elaborated on that because I think it's important. Yeah. It's like, this is not always applicable 100% of the time. It might be the case. We were taught that we could have a client that comes in, we're working with them, and they are exhibiting characteristics in one of our parents, for example, that we've never dealt with. One of the things we've never either maybe expressed to a parent that we don't like or whatever. And that could come up. And that is a form of projection. It's nothing about the other person. That's not the source of the emotional trigger in us. But I would say it's certainly an extremely reliable question to ask is, do I do this? How do I feel about that about myself? Etc. But if it comes up, there's nothing there that comes up for you, then the projection could be coming from another place.
Right. Yeah. So I want to offer some examples as well here from my own life. So my most recent example, and I think I have an example of each of those. My most recent example of experiencing this projection perception thing was that I was watching something and I got irritated. I got like uncharacteristically irritated by something, which was essentially someone making big promises and not taking much action. So like big words and nothing behind them. And it's like I really noticed that this irritates me unreasonably, right? And so that's when I caught myself pretty quickly. I was like, how come this is irritating to me so much? Like what do I care what this person does, basically, you know? But then on reflection, it is something that there are things in my life where I've done it. So first of all, it's a value of mine. I really want to be someone whose word has weight. I really believe in this kind of integrity where if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And I think that's generally a good thing. But I guess the flip side of that is that I'm pretty unforgiving towards myself in the instances where that wasn't the case. And so, for example, I tried to make a cookbook with my cousin and some friends. We started this project and we got it like 80% done or something, but we never finished it. It was, a lot of things went wrong. But basically, we never finished it. And this is something that really bothers me. It bothers me so much that I started this project and didn't finish it. And so that is the example of what I'm disliking in that person is something I'm disliking in myself, right? I'm happy to say that it's relatively rare, but still, and I noticed that really, I just hate it so much when I say I'm going to do something and I don't follow through on that. And so that is something where, I think it's good to realize that that's what's happening because it lets me be more compassionate. But also, I do think that it points at like an unresolved issue where probably I'm probably a bit too hard line about this. And like I said, I'm kind of too unforgiving. I don't allow myself to just be like, yeah, okay, some projects you start fail. Sometimes things don't work out. It's like I don't allow myself that. And there's probably something there. I could probably do better in that sense, right? I could probably be a bit more forgiving. And kind of, I allow other people to fail, It's fine. I'm not that punishing towards other people if they sometimes aren't able to do what they said they're going to do. But I am very harsh with myself. So that kind of points to something that I could still work on. And it is the irritation that I felt at something external that showed me this, that made this clear to me. And another example from the second thing you said, where it's kind of a projection where someone reminds you of someone else, basically. This is a problem I've definitely had with relationships, where sometimes I notice that I'm responding in a way where I'm essentially projecting one of my ex-girlfriends into my current partner. And I have to remind myself, hold on, this is not my ex-girlfriend. It's like, yes, if this was my ex-girlfriend, then this situation would be, difficult or dangerous or painful or something. But it's not this situation. So it's like almost an old program from back then is coming in, trying to protect me or something, right? And I have to remember, no, this is not my ex-girlfriend. This is not 20 years ago, So, and that's, I think, an example of that where, again, it can seem like the unexamined perspective is the thing that you just did or said hurt me. But actually, the thing that you just did or said reminded me of something that happened ages ago, and that hurt me. And the memory of that pain is coming back, And that can totally change. Like if you're aware of that, that completely changes how that whole situation plays out.
Yeah. And I can speak of another example of that. So living with, I'm living with Jonas and Ryan at the moment, and we'll be living with Dean soon, which I'm looking forward to. But so we have different standards of like cleanliness and stuff. And initially when I moved to Lisbon here, I started living with Jonas, and he just has a standard of cleanliness where it's not as strict, should we say. And
messy is what you're saying.
I'm saying that, but I don't want to be mean. So it's like, but yeah. So initially I was like immediately triggered by this because I'd just come from living alone, where it's just everything was it was pretty damn tidy all the time. And this was triggering to me. And initially my mind, like I believed what my mind was telling me, which is a fatal error a lot of the time. Like I believed everything my mind was saying. It's like, he shouldn't be this, he must be that. I think there was a psychologist called Albert Ellis, who was the founder of rational emotive therapy, that coined the term masturbation. It's like we have clients coming in and they're masturbating. It's like, what does that mean? It means like they're placing judgments, should judgments and must judgments on themselves or the people in the world that don't correspond with the actual reality and the truth of the way people are and the way reality is and the way they are.
So it's like people must do this, you must do that. The fact that you did this must mean that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was what I was doing. I was like, because I'm tidy, he must be tidy too. And if he's not tidy, then there's something wrong with him. And it's like, whoa, Jesus. So I did some work on this, and I recognized a couple of things. One of the things I recognized was because I was on this awakening, integrating my masculinity hype around that time. I was kind of on the tail end of that. I'd spent like a year and a half sort of getting into masculinity and reading all the books and doing loads of meditations and like being more assertive and all this stuff. And it seems that in the process of doing that, I had kind of, in the same way that in order to become lean, I had to shun obese and overweight. In order to become a man, I had to shun and repress child. And certain aspects of childlike psychology and childlike behavior, like irresponsibility, being messy, not tidying up after yourself, that sort of thing. So that showed up to me as like, ugh, and like a character judgment of Jonas for, because I was basically seeing him as the child, and I didn't ever want to be that because I was trying to be a man, not a child. So it was easier to project it out into the world and say, like, Jonas is a child. I'm not like that. I'm very different. I'm a man. And it was just much easier. So that's one of the things I recognised. The other thing I recognised was that this standard of tidiness was not mine. This standard of tidiness was my father's. It wasn't me. I didn't decide. There was not a day in my entire life that I sit down and go, what standards of cleanliness do I truly think makes, for a person should have?
Yeah.
I have never done that in my life. It just seems that it's like we have these programs and these software that just gets installed on the operating system of our brains and our minds and stuff. And there's tons of this going on, but we'd never question it, and it's not ours.
Yeah.
And this was one of them. So I had a conversation with Jonas about this because I'd had a week where I was just cranky. I must have been fucking abysmal to live with. I was just like, yeah. And I just had a conversation with him where I just said, listen, I must have been pretty rough to live with this week. Sorry about that. And this is what's been going on for me. I talked to him about it, and I said, thing is just when I see plates around and stuff, it's like my father's voice speaks through me, and that comes up straight away. I can almost hear him bollocking me for leaving plates out. And it's like I'm doing the same in my mind to you, and I don't want to do that. We come to compromises and stuff, but the point is that the awareness around what's actually going on. And the cool thing is I could actually observe it when I see plates around. I almost do have this immediate, like, strong judgmental voice that uses the exact same words my father did and everything else. So it's like, oh, okay, that's not my voice then. And the awareness of it creates the space that allows you to choose your response to it. I think that's the crucial thing about awareness. Awareness creates space, and space gives you the freedom to choose a different response rather than just have the knee-jerk reaction that you're just going to have.
Yeah, and I think it's a good example of like living with messy roommates where this is not about becoming a doormat, right? This is not about just letting other people run rampant through your life and kind of just dealing with the consequences of that. The issue of plates being lying around all over the apartment and the issue of your emotional turmoil are two separate issues. And I think this is also where we conflate them in a way. Yeah, we don't realize the two separate issues. Like, of course, you can still have boundaries, and of course, you can still, living together with people, you have to establish some rules. Who does the cleaning? Well, what do we do not to end up just living in a pigsty? But that can happen without all of this emotional triggering happening, right? Without all of this emotional turmoil going on. And I think that's where you can get the value out of this, is if you realize these are two separate problems. And I'm going to solve the internal problem, and I'm going to solve the external problem. And I'm not going to assume that, of course you can say, listen, everybody has to keep a super high standard of cleanliness so that this is never triggered inside me. But then if you treat every problem like that, then you end up living where it's like you're always treading on eggshells because you're always avoiding all the stuff that can trigger you, right? And you become basically very fragile. And to me, that's like not a very desirable state of being. So I would rather be someone where I can deal with my shit, I can recognize emotional issues and work through them, and I can have clear boundaries and I have kind of good communication and so on and so forth, so that I both have a nice environment, plus I'm not easily triggered all the time, right? So it's kind of the best of both worlds. That would be the goal I strive for here.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing to consider. This is not This is not binary. You
Yeah.
know? It's like if we consider too far to either spectrum, you become, and I've fallen into this trap a few times, to be honest, because I used to just be terrified of confrontation, terrified of having uncomfortable conversations, but I was super comfortable dealing with my own inner baggage using like meditation and this kind of inner work. I've done this for quite a while, to be honest. I've developed that skill, you could say. So I have fallen into the trap living with other people, for example, where there'd be loads of stuff that's emotionally triggering for me, and it'd be like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to go away on my own and deal with this, and then that'll be fine. But it wasn't. It was just because after a certain point, that lends itself to suppression and to repression eventually. And the problem is you're avoiding. You're using inner work and doing this as an avoidance strategy.
Yeah.
So as important as an action is the intention behind it. Is as important in my view. So it's like if the intention is avoidance, then the action, however it may look, you're still avoiding something. So I went too far into that realm. Just I'm going to deal with all this myself and not confront anyone. I've never actually gone too far the other way.
Yeah.
I'm just confronting everyone all the time about everything, not taking any responsibility for my inner world.
But that clearly happens too. That also exists, right?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting. I think that's an attitude that I've been cultivating, and that seems to be working really well for me. Is like this. As a principle, don't avoid the work that you're being shown, essentially, right? So it's like, okay, there's something is setting me off here. I'm not going to avoid the inner work nor the external work. So it's an attitude. I think of this as like I want to charge at my problems head first, essentially, where I go, okay, this is being shown to me. Here's something that comes up. I want to charge straight into this and do the uncomfortable stuff that needs to be done because, well, like you, I've tried all the other stuff for long enough to know that that's not good. I've tried avoiding things and retreating and all this kind of stuff. It's, in the end, that's much more uncomfortable than the short term, like the acute discomfort of charging at your problems head first and actually working through them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So specifically, like, let's give people something like, let's try to put together like a set of instructions, like what to do, right? Something sets you off emotionally. What do you do? What's the recipe?
Cool. So first of all, and this is why to my private clients, I recommend a continuous practice of some form of mindfulness. I really do. Because if you're not tuned in, or if you're not practiced for a minute, the skill of tuning into what physical signals are going on in your body, you have very little body awareness. You're prohibited from knowing what emotions are going on within you, and you don't have as much space as you could. And as I said earlier, awareness, space, it gives you the capacity to choose a different response to any given scenario. So I think breathing, taking time. If something sets you off emotionally, I usually say to clients, take 10 breaths and count them.
I think it's also something that I find valuable, and that can be very difficult, but I think it's a good habit to develop, is to tune into your emotions in the sense of, so you're feeling anger, for example, and you tune into what is the physical sensation of anger. And that seems to be a good way to prevent the reflexive suppression of it. But it's also not the same as like acting out. It's not the same as kind of just, letting loose, which is usually destructive. Like with negative emotions, that would just be destructive. But if you feel the emotion come up and you try to, I think of it as like I try to zoom in to the sensation. Try to zoom in exactly, what does this feel like? Where is this happening in my body? What does this feel like? It seems to be a really good combination of allowing the emotion to be there and allowing it to unfold without it like taking over it doesn't, because I think that's because you're maintaining that awareness, you're maintaining that perspective of awareness. So you're not overcome by the emotion as much.
Yeah. Yes. And something, a kind of framework that we can use as something practical to work with is something I sort of came up with, which is the AAA sort of framework. Awareness, acceptance, action. So awareness is this stuff. It's the mindfulness. It's being conscious of what's actually going on in this present moment. And just as a little bonus tip, when it comes to strong feelings, they can stick around and exacerbate. They can become exacerbated, I should say, depending on the stories that we're telling in the exact moment. So it's like an emotion. If you become aware of an emotion, and if you were accepting and non-judgmental about it, it wouldn't be there for longer. It might be, but most of the time it isn't. Most of the time it will visit you and leave. But if you immediately believe a story that your mind serves up, say someone does something that winds you up, triggers you emotionally, ow, but then your mind says that person's trying to take advantage of you. That person's saying this to get one over on you. And you believe all of that instantly. So now you're not just angry, but there's a sense of resentment building up instantly. And you feel like you need, this is where the kind of vengeance thing can come in. And then you take something as just natural as anger, and it starts to compound with all the stories that your mind creates. So that's kind of like a side note, is what you can do here is when you're feeling an emotion, you can tap into the language part of you, and you can say, rather than saying, I'm angry, the way you phrase an emotion to yourself can make a difference. So instead of saying, for example, I'm angry, you say, I'm feeling some anger right now. Doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start putting this into practice, I'm telling you now, this stuff works. I'm feeling some anger right now. It's different to I'm angry. Do you see how I'm angry is? The anger is a lot closer to your self-image. It's a lot closer to home.
It's like I am. It's almost like I am anger.
It's like almost one or two letters away from saying I am anger. It's like I'm angry. I'm anger. It's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
You say, okay, I'm feeling some anger right now.
Yeah.
So when you say I'm feeling some anger right now, you're basically saying the anger's over there and I'm over here. Yeah. I can observe it. Yeah. You're also saying, by saying right now at the end of it, you're acknowledging the transient nature of the anger right now. I'm not anger forever. Yeah. This anger is not overcoming me and I'm going to be angry forever. Like, no. It's like I'm feeling some anger right now, temporarily. Mm-hmm. So that's just a little tip I wanted to give you guys because it's something I've used a lot and it really helps. So the thing is, like, first thing is awareness. Become aware of everything that's going on. Second point is acceptance. And this can actually be surprisingly challenging. Can I accept these emotions right now? Can I accept that this is how I feel? And there's a cool thing with this. If the answer is, I can't accept this, then you accept that too.
Like, can I accept that I don't want to accept that I'm feeling like this right now?
Yes. You keep going one level back.
Yeah.
Until you reach a point where, well, this is ridiculous. Of course I can accept that. That's clearly what's going on. Yeah. So that's how you reach a point of acceptance. There's other questions you can ask yourself and stuff, but that's the thing. Mm-hmm. Then the third thing is action. You may need to take action. You may need to say something, or you may need to remove yourself from the situation, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of what you do acutely in the moment, right? When you feel you're irritated, an emotion is triggered. That's kind of the recipe. And look, nobody's going to perfectly do this the next time something irritates them, but it's like you can train yourself to respond in this way, right? You can practice, and over time you'll get better until at some point that's your normal response to emotional irritation.
Yeah.
Then when we come to, well, how do you examine what this says about you, and how do you turn that into growth? I think what's good. So obviously, I like writing as a tool to clarify this kind of thing. So that's something where I'd sit down and write about it. And you can also approach this with kind of soft questions. The more resistance you have, the softer the question needs to be. Because obviously you can just ask, what is it inside me? in what way am I doing the thing that I hated about this other person? But that might be you might have too much resistance against that. So you can soften the question by basically asking, let me see if I could formulate this. What might be something inside me that is similar to what irritated me about what this other person did? So it's not like you have to immediately go to, yes, this is it. This is actually me. I do this. If you just think, well, if I had to choose one thing that maybe is somewhat related in my behavior to what irritated me, what would it be? It's like I'm not making a commitment here, but what might it be? And what might happen is that because you're softening the question, because you're not immediately like committing to admitting guilt or something like that, right? What might happen is that you start writing about it, and as you start writing about it, you're like, oh yeah, I do that, you know? But it's like you had to kind of allow your mind to start thinking in that direction to actually uncover what's going on. Because otherwise, if you just go, well, in what way is that me? You might just resist it. It's like, no, I don't do that. I would never do that. I hate this. Oh, this is terrible, right? And that's not useful. So you want to basically soften the question, just like, what maybe could it be? And there's no commitment here. Don't worry about it. You can write whatever you want. It doesn't have to. You can later decide whether this is true or not.
Yeah. That's a good idea. And I don't think I would have ever gotten good at this without writing. Because writing it gives you the objective look at what's going on. There's also something else. And I don't quite know where, in terms of like a step-by-step thing, where this would fit in. But it is something that I've cultivated that helps with this. So I used to have quite a fixed, narrow, both those things, important words, fixed and narrow view of what humans should be in order to be a good person.
Yeah.
Fixed being very rigid, there's no leeway. And narrow being humans should be this, and anything that deviates outside of that straight away makes them bad. Makes them bad people. Means that they're screwing everyone over, including me and everyone else. And if everyone was just like this, then everything would work out. Which is also something we like to tell ourselves quite often. Mm-hmm. Like if everyone was just like, surprisingly enough, me, then everything would kind of work out.
Imagine the odds.
What are the odds of that? 7 billion people on the planet. If everyone was like this one of them, then the whole world would be better.
You happen to be the model. You happen to be the model. It's amazing. Really.
It's fascinating how that worked out. Wow, let's not question it anymore, eh?
Yeah. Let's think about something else.
Yeah. So rather than having a fixed and narrow view of the way humans are, it's helped me over time to cultivate a more fluid and wider view of what humans are. So, for example, I have there's a kind of psychological set of techniques or principles or kind of model of psychology called shadow work, where this kind of work concerns itself mainly with finding your projections. So are you familiar with what like the shadow self or the shadow is in personality?
Vaguely, yeah.
Right. So essentially we have a self-image. We have like a person, like whoever we imagine ourselves to be, as like Oliver, I am this kind of person with all these characteristics, etc. In order to say I am this person, I simultaneously have to say, in order to be this, I must also not be all this, because every trait kind of has its opposite. So
it's like if I'm honest, it means I'm not a liar.
Exactly.
I'm not dishonest. Yeah.
And the more of that we do, the more we always have a shadow. No one doesn't have a shadow. So that is in sort of Jungian depth psychology what they'd call the shadow, which is the part of you. And this is like a misconception people make, is they think that the shadow is the dark side, evil and stuff. Not necessarily. Because, for example, in the Nightmare Before Christmas with Ebenezer Scrooge, his shadow was positive. So he was this crusty billionaire dude who was just like, oh, fuck everyone else. I don't care. Like homeless people. Oh, you should get a job, mate. So this is a person whose overt personality was, kind of negative, wasn't cooperative with people, wasn't compassionate and stuff. And he had the series of nightmares that allowed him to acknowledge his shadow, which was positive, and bring those traits out into the world. So the shadow is not necessarily negative. It can be positive. It's basically anything about us that's hidden.
Yeah.
So through doing shadow work, one of the exercises they'll have you do in shadow work is the most evil. I mean, this is some serious shit, by the way. The most evil actions that humans have partaken in, find, however small that part of you is, the part of you that could do that. And it's extremely difficult to do. But when you do, it's like, fuck. You do. There's a small part of you that could do some pretty screwed up shit.
Yeah.
And the thing is, shadow work is kind of encapsulated in a broader framework of self-compassion, where it says, listen, you found that part of you, but this doesn't mean that you uniquely are bad. What you've done is you have become aware of a part of humans, of the human psyche, because humans, and this comes back to the narrow and fixed rather than fluid and wide concept, humans are capable of a wide range of things, an absolute mind-boggling array of different emotions. Some extremely dark, some beautiful and altruistic and completely selfless. But one of the things that's really helped me is and given me the kind of courage to face my own darkness and face my own projections and stuff, is the knowledge that whatever I find, it doesn't mean anything uniquely screwed up about me. I'm a human being. I belong to the human race. I've inherited just a frankly just inconceivable amount of information in this mind, and I didn't choose most of it. I didn't choose any of it, to be honest.
You can't. That's true, right? You can't choose especially things like emotional responses. Like, I didn't choose to get angry. That happened to me, and I think there's an interesting concept where it's a different worldview. It's like the opposite of this would be essentialism. And essentialism in the philosophical sense, not in so there's a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, which is more about, like, let's say minimalism or something like that. Very oversimplified, but I'm not talking about that essentialism. I'm talking about the philosophical concept of essentialism, which is that you identify a negative thing inside you or inside someone else, and you say, this reveals the true nature of you. Right? Because you said the one bad thing, that reveals that actually you're a bad person. It points to your essential badness. And, it's like, so it's saying that you doing that bad thing once, that was your true self peeking through. Finally, we see what a bad person you are, right?
Fascinating.
And that would be the opposite of that, where it's like any sliver of negative is like, oh, that's it. That's proof that you're actually a bad person and not worth loving, etc., right? And instead of thinking like that, thinking about, well, it's choice. It's about choice. Yes, I can be vengeful and angry and so on and so forth, but then I have a choice to make in how I act in the world, how I show up in the world. And that would then also be a more flexible view, right? Instead of, because I think that's the thing that also creates a lot of fear and a lot of resistance, where you fear that if I have this bad thought, it makes me a bad person, and that makes me unworthy, etc., etc. And so at all costs, I must avoid this thing. And then that creates so much tension and so much, it makes you uncomfortable just talking about it. But instead, if you can say, yes, we are a multitude, there's all this stuff going on in my psyche. Some of it is very unpleasant, but it's like I have a choice in how to show up, and that's what matters.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing. So a long time ago, I kind of gave up on being happy. I gave up on happiness.
Fair enough.
Like to just, because the thing is, I was operating under a daft assumption about how the ultimate state to be achieved in life, which was perpetual permanent happiness, which no human being has ever experienced, by the way. I'm talking like permanent happiness, just literally no fluctuation, just like,
lining at maximum happiness.
And then you die at 80 or 100 or whatever. Painlessly happy, like that's
mid-orgasm.
You come and you go, So I was unconsciously thinking, I should do that, but it didn't work because I was.
I'm surprised.
Shockingly enough, I felt angry every now and then. I felt disappointed, and they weren't happy. God damn it! But I came across the concept in a book called The Power of Negative Emotions by Robert Biswas, I don't know how to say that name, Diner and some other person, where it talks about, instead of happiness, let's aim for wholeness, which means, rather than saying I am this trait, and that's it, that's all I am, while repressing practically every other part of the emotional spectrum, you bring everything into the concept of who you are or what you're capable of. And that doesn't exclude the choice thing from the equation, because you can say, I'm capable of all these things, but I know I'm capable of being an asshole. I'm also capable of being a great person. And I'm going to choose consciously with eyes open to be the good person. Because if I've got a choice, why would I choose to be an asshole? Yeah. So, that's the thing with projection and the thing with becoming whole.
Yeah. Damn. I mean, it's like we've opened up a whole other can of worms here, which is, it's funny when we talk about this kind of thing. There's part of me that always thinks like, I want to make it as practical as possible. Because, I don't want to be an armchair philosopher, basically.
Yeah.
And it's also, I'm also kind of tempted to reiterate, like the ultimate goal here is basically high performance, right? It's like being a high performance, high power individual in the world. That is, for me, that's the goal of personal development. It is to be high performing, to upgrade my power level essentially, and to gain more freedom. And when we talk about stuff like this, like, okay, well, that sounds interesting and nice and so on, but I want to be badass and do shit in the world. So how does this help,
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, this stuff is super important. This stuff is super important because it's like, there is an aspect of this kind of emotional work that just frees up so much of your potential, right? So much of your potential is tied up in this kind of emotional stuff, in this emotionally constricting stuff. And working through these things, it can feel like it's not the most productive thing to do. If you're like, well, okay, I'm sitting here writing about my emotions and whatever, versus working on my business to make money. It seems like one is clearly more important than the other. But I have to say, like, in my own experience, doing this internal work, doing the introspective work, working through emotions, and also building these kinds of habits of mind, these kinds of habits of how to respond to emotions and things like that, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference to your power level, basically, in ways that I wish I could formulate more clearly.
Yeah. And for me, what comes up straight away is the idea of mental/emotional friction. If you have emotions that you haven't processed because you don't know how, or you don't spend the time to do this, or you don't see the value in it, some emotionally triggering event that you could have processed and dealt with pretty quickly, your mind is just going to interrupt you throughout the day, or pull you into a set of thoughts and emotional responses and stuff that will distract you from doing the things that align with your values, and the things that make you a high performance person. So for me, I don't see these two things as being exclusive or separate at all. So I spoke to you quite often about the things that were holding me back professionally was basically neurotic friction, which was essentially shame and perfectionism and fear.
Yeah.
And obviously, the greater part of overcoming fears is to move actively through action into the direction of the fear. But also there's another side to this, which is to do this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that I would love to get a conversation started. Because I'd love to just have an exchange with some people in the community as well about this. About where I feel a need for feedback. I feel a need for, okay, where do you stand on this? Like, what does this sound like to you? Do you feel motivated and empowered to actually work on these things? Is this helping, or are there things about this that are still unclear? Basically, what questions do you have about this, or what do you find appealing or not appealing about this? I'd really like to get some feedback, because, like I said, I feel like it's a super important topic, but I'm not entirely sure yet if we're hitting the nail on the head with this.
In terms of what? In terms of if it's...
In terms of actually helping people translate these ideas into an upgraded life quality, basically, right? But yeah, it's just something that is... Yeah, I'd just love to get some comments, some feedback. So in general, right, you can go to the show notes and leave a comment there, or you can comment on the YouTube video, or you can go to anchor.fm/Icario, and there's a leave voice message button there. So would just be interested to hear your feedback and your questions on this, because I think there's a lot of ground to cover here. I just want to make sure that the way we cover that ground really serves our audience.
Fair. I agree. Guys, that is it for today. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, links in the show notes at icario.com/00 whatever. whatever this episode number
Whatever
would be.
it happens to be, yeah. Great planning.
God damn it. But yeah, take care, guys. Until next time. See you then.
See ya.